The One Tree by Stephen R. Donaldson. Part 1. Risk. 1. Starfare's Gem. Lyndon Avery walked beside Covenant, down through the ways of Coercy. Below them, the stone giant ship, Starfare's Gem, came gliding around toward the sole intact levee at the foot of the ancient city, but she paid no heed to it. Earlier, she had witnessed the way the Drummond rode the wind like a boon, at once massive and delicate, full-sailed and precise, a vessel of hope for Covenant's quest, and for her own. As she and the Unbeliever, with Bryn, Cale, and then Vane behind them, descended toward the headrock of the piers of the Grieve, she could have studied the craft with pleasure. Its vitality offered gladness to her senses. But Covenant had just sent the two stone downers, Sunder and Hollian, toward the upper land in hope that they would be able to muster resistance among the villages against the depredations of the Clave. And that hope was founded on the fact that he had given them Loric's krill to use against the Sunbane. Covenant needed that blade, both as a weapon to take the place of the wild magic which destroyed peace, and as a defense against the mystery of Vane, the Demondin spawn. Yet, this morning he had given the krill away. When Lyndon had asked him for an explanation, he had replied, "I'm already too dangerous." Dangerous. The word resonated for her. In ways which none but she could perceive, he was sick with power. His native illness, his leprosy, his quiescent, even though he had lost or surrendered most of the self-protective disciplines which kept it slumberous. But in its place grew the venom that a raver and the Sunbane had afflicted upon him. That moral poison was latent at present, but it crouched in him like a predator, awaiting its time to spring. To her sight, it underlay the hue of his skin as if it had blackened the marrow of his bones. With his venom in his white ring, he was the most dangerous man she had ever known. She desired that danger in him. It defined for her the quality of strength which had originally attracted to her him on Haven Farm. He had smiled for Joan when he had sold his life for hers. That smile had revealed more of his strange potency, his capacity to out-wrestle fate itself, than any threat or violence could have. The Kimura release he had given to the dead of the Grieve had shown the lengths to which he was able to go in the name of his complex guilt and passions. He was a paradox, and Lyndon ached to emulate him. For all his leprosy and venom, his self-judgment and rage, he was an affirmation, an assertion of life and a commitment to the land, a statement of himself in opposition to anything the despiser could do. And what was she? What had she done with her whole life except flee from her past? All of her severity, all of her drive toward medical effectiveness against death, had been negative from the start. A rejection of her own moral heritage, rather than an approval of the beliefs she nominally served. She was like the land under the tyranny of the Clave and the Sunbane, a place ruled by fear and bloodshed rather than love. Covenant's example had taught her this about herself. Even when she had not understood why he was so attracted to her, she had followed him instinctively. And now she knew that she wanted to be like him. She wanted to be a danger to the forces which impelled people to their deaths. She studied him as they watched, trying to imprint the gaunt, prophetic lines of his visage, the strictness of his mouth, and the wild tangle of his beard upon her own resolve. He emulated a straight anticipation that she shared. Like him, she looked forward to the prospect of a voyage of hope in the company of giants. Although she had spent only a few days with Grimond Honestgrave, Cable Sea Dreamer, Pitchwife, and the first of the search, she already comprehended the pang of love which entered Covenant's voice whenever he spoke of the giants he had known. But she also possessed a private eagerness, an anticipation of her own. Almost from the moment when her health sense had awakened, it had been a source of pain and dismay for her. Her first acute perception had been of the ill of Nossic's murder, and that sight had launched a seemingly endless sequence of ravers and Sunbane which had driven her to the very edges of survival. The continuous onslaught of palpable evil, moral and physical disease which she would never be able to cure, had touched her with ineffectuality, demonstrating her unworth at every touch and glance. And then she had fallen into the hands of the Clave, into the power of Gibbon Raver. The prophecy which he had uttered against her, the sabulous corner atrocity which he had radiated to her, had crammed every corner of her soul with a loathing and rejection indistinguishable from self-abhorrence. She had sworn that she would never again open the doors of her senses to any outward appeal. But she had not kept that vow. The observe of her sharp vulnerability was a peculiar and necessary usefulness. The same percipience which so exposed her to dismay had also enabled her to provide for her own recovery from coarser poison and broken bones. That capacity had touched her medical instincts deeply, giving a validation to her identity which she had thought lost when she had been translated out of the world she understood. In addition, she had been able to serve her companions by helping them against the murderous ill of the lurker of the Sarangrave. And then the company had escaped Sarangrave Flat into Sea Reach, where the sunbane did not reign. Surrounded by natural health, by fall weather and color as pristine as the beginning of life, and accompanied by giants, especially by Pitchwife, whose irrepressible humor seemed a balm for every darkness. She had felt her ankle heal under the eldritch influence of Diamond Draught. She had tasted the intangible loveliness of the world, had experienced keenly the gift Covenant had given to the dead of the grave. She had begun to know in the most visceral way that her health sense was accessible to good as well as to evil, and perhaps she could exercise some choice over the doom which Gibbon had foretold for her. That was her hope. Perhaps in that way, if no other, she would be able to transform her life. The old man whose life she had saved on Haven Farm had said, "Be true. There is also love in the world." For the first time, those words did not fill her with dread. She hardly looked away from Covenant as they descended the giant wrought stairs. He appeared equal to anything. But she was also aware of other things. The clear morning, the long, salt-rimed emptiness of Coercy, the intranscendent black of peril of Vane, and, at her back, the Haruchai. The way they paced the stone belied their characteristic dispassion. They seemed almost avid to explore the unknown earth with Covenant and the giants. Lyndon concentrated on these details as they formed the texture of the new life she desired. However, as the companions moved out into the direct sunlight on the base of the city, where the first Sea Dreamer and Pitchwife waited with Seer and Hergrum, Lyndon's gaze leaped outward as if it were drawn by a lodestone, and she saw Starfare's gem easing its way into the levee.